Hi, how's it going?
Hello everyone. A lot of people seem to be looking for a cheap camera or camcorder, but there's a problem. These days, most camera makers have all but abandoned the lower end market in favor of the mid and high end. I think a big reason for this is the fact that so many people now have smartphones with decent cameras on them. Why bother manufacturing cheap cameras when everyone has a camera that's just as capable in their pockets already? This leaves a hole in the market which has unfortunately been filled to overflowing with a flood of generic cameras from China. I've reviewed quite a few of these generic cameras, and they're all very similar. This camera, for instance, says Minolta on it, but it very much fits within this group. They have similar interfaces, poor build quality, reliability issues, quality control issues, lackluster feature sets, often non-working features, exaggerated specs, file compatibility issues with some programs, and sometimes outright lies about features or specs. In previous videos, I've pointed out alternative options in a similar price range that were vastly superior. When looking at the more overpriced of these generic cameras, superior alternatives like this are still readily available. Unfortunately, in the $100 to $200 range, alternative options are becoming harder to find. Cheap, name-brand point-and-shoot cameras just aren't as easy to come by as they used to be. I recently got this Minolta to test, and I planned to show how much better current point-and-shoot camera from a name brand was at a similar price. It turns out there just isn't much available at the moment. Most alternatives I can find are anywhere from 2 to 3 times the price of this camera. It seems that cameras like this Minolta do reside in a price class all to themselves for the time being. You can find deals on far better cameras used, or potentially at outlet stores and stuff like that. That would be a far better option if you can find something, but I hesitate to make a blanket recommendation like that. The used and outlet markets obviously fluctuate quite a bit in terms of price and availability, so it's tough to know what someone will or won't be able to find, not to mention that buying used can be risky. So, for better or for worse, in terms of available new right now, generic cameras like this are the main option in the $100 to $150 price range. But does that mean you should get one? Personally, I strongly recommend saving up a bit and spending more for something far better. Or search around for a while to find something better used. Hopefully after this video, you'll at least understand why I feel that way. But I understand that it may not be possible or practical for everyone, so I'm still going to review this Minolta. If you are on a really tight budget, it's all the more important to know what these generic cameras are like. The less money you have, the more crushing it is to spend it on something that fails to live up to expectations. Plus, what if it outright fails? While they claim to have a warranty is only as good as the company backing it. Speaking of that, the rights to use the Minolta name were purchased not long ago by a company called Elite Brands LLC. This isn't the Minolta of old. You have to decide how much you trust a company like Elite Brands to have your back if you ever have an issue. And the same goes for whoever is printing their name on the camera. If you search for Minolta cameras just about anywhere right now, it looks like Elite Brands seems to have taken every generic camera design to ever come out of China and slapped the Minolta name on it. But these generic cameras and camcorders are available under many names, whether it says Minolta, Ordro, or some string of characters that defy pronunciation. The vast majority of these cameras are very similar. In the last few years, I've tried an embarrassing number of them. More than I've made videos about, and more than are here on the desk. I keep hoping that somewhere among the heap, I'll find 1 or 2 that are better that I can happily recommend people spend their money on. So many of them turn out to be the same thing with a different name, or the same thing in a slightly different body. Here is an unbranded camcorder, and this Minolta clearly has a slightly tweaked version of the same menu system. That doesn't mean there isn't variation among these cameras. Some are worse than others, but it's a total crapshoot on what you'll get. I think more than anything, I dislike the marketing of these cameras. They advertise as if they are advanced, cutting-edge cameras full of the latest features that you would expect from a modern camera, but they don't deliver. They instead feel like they were designed to look like what you'd expect from a good camera, but it's all show. For instance, take a look at the lens on this Minolta. If you look close, you can see the actual tiny lens down in there. This camera has a sensor and lens module no larger than what comes on a basic smartphone. It's fixed focus, fixed focal length, and fixed aperture lens. But they put this large fake lens facade around it to make it seem like more than it actually is. It doesn't come with a lens cap, and there isn't even an outer lens element to keep things from getting inside. There's even a slight gap around the edge of the lens that could let dust and dirt into the camera. The camera body is hard, slippery plastic, which isn't surprising, but so is even this textured black grip is just hard plastic. There is a molded area on the back of the camera that mimics a thumb rest, but there are buttons right where you'd expect to rest your thumb. It makes for a camera that's slightly awkward to hold and almost requires two hands to hold securely depending on what you're doing. The mode dial turns okay. That's a bit rough. The zoom rocker is very small and actually kind of pointy, and it binds terribly. So if you do it just right, you can get it to move, but it binds, and then you have to push really hard, and it's just uncomfortable to use. The shutter button has 3 distinct resistance levels. But only the bottom 2 do something, the first one doesn't do anything. And when you half press, or more accurately 2/3 press the shutter, you get a little white box on the screen that then turns green. This mimics the behavior of a camera acquiring focus, but this camera is fixed focus. A partial press doesn't affect or even lock exposure, and this box will turn green if the image is pure black. It does nothing functional. In fact, the multi-stage shutter button on this camera is entirely pointless. It's even worse than pointless because it actively makes the camera worse. Once that little box shows up, you have to fully press the button and hold it for a second or two before it will take a picture. If you release the button too quickly, no picture. But if you just hammer the shutter button all the way down quickly enough that the box doesn't appear, it takes your picture right away. Well, sometimes. There, took a picture. Took a picture. Well, that was too soon after the last one. So even if the little message that says it's saving goes away, it still takes another second or so before you can take a picture. You see? Now it finally took one. Having to press the shutter button that fast can introduce camera shake. And this behavior in general just means that the shutter button is inconsistent and it can lead to missed shots if you press too fast or slightly too slow and nothing happens. And all that because of this extra feature that makes it look like something but does nothing. Powering the camera on requires holding the power button for a couple seconds and waiting through the startup time. I timed it at about 12 seconds from first pressing the power button to actually being able to take a picture. And it's an even longer wait if you want to record video, because no matter what mode you are in when you turn the camera off, it will always revert to standard photo mode when turned back on. And changing modes takes several seconds. Unfortunately, even a very quick tap of the power button results in the camera instantly turning off, even if it's recording video at the time. Considering the grip design and the fact that the power button is nestled right next to the record and shutter buttons, it's pretty easy to accidentally hit that button and have the camera turn off. And that results in at least 12 seconds or more until you can get the camera turned back on and start taking pictures or videos again. Another quirk I found is that while this camera has a USB-C port, it will charge from a USB-A charger using a USB-C to A cable, but it will not charge from a USB-C charger with a USB-C to C cable. It's as if it doesn't have the ability to negotiate the proper voltage from a USB-C charger, so it just doesn't charge. I have older cameras with a micro USB plug that charge just fine from a USB-C charger with a USB-C micro cable, but this camera with a USB-C port won't charge from a USB-C charger. Speaking of the battery meter has 3 bars. Once down to 1 bar, the camera begins randomly popping up a message telling you that the battery is low. It will still let you start recording a video, but it will stop the recording after about 5 seconds and say the recording stopped because the battery is low. And even when that pop-up isn't on screen, there's no low battery warning, and the battery meter doesn't turn red or anything, it just says 1 bar. But here's the thing. I took nearly 300 pictures, most of them with the flash, after the low battery message started popping up occasionally. So obviously it starts warning you very early. And when that last battery bar finally goes away, the battery meter does turn red, and a second or so later, the camera shuts off. This is a fixed focus camera, but it does have a fairly unique feature among this type of camera. It has a built-in macro mode. The macro mode shifts the entire lens further from the sensor, and by entire lens, I just mean the tiny actual lens in there. Not even this square part here. It's actually smaller than that. It's just that little tiny round lens. In standard mode, the focus is fixed roughly at infinity, with the minimum focus distance being around 2 to 3 feet, so anything closer than that is out of focus. In macro mode, the focus point is fixed at roughly 3 inches in front of the lens, and anything closer or further than that is out of focus. The camera has a flip-up flash. It's just a little LED though, not a true strobe flash. It's similar to what you'd find on a smartphone, but this camera doesn't adjust very well in terms of exposure or white balance to compensate for the flash. It also isn't very bright, so in anything other than a very dim close quarters, it doesn't do much. And when used in close quarters, it often results in pictures that are overexposed with the white balance pretty far off. It technically works, but it feels more like it's tacked on so they can check a box rather than designed to work well. The only manual exposure adjustment is a -3 to +3 exposure compensation. You can also set a fixed ISO if you choose, but the camera will continue to adjust shutter speed to adjust the exposure automatically. There are multiple metering modes, but any differences between them are so minor as to be basically pointless. The different scene settings on the mode dial are bizarre and also pointless. Some legitimately do nothing. All the night mode does is lock the ISO at 800, which seems counterintuitive and could be done yourself with the ISO button right here, easier than messing with the mode dial. This mode here simply adds +2 exposure compensation, which again could be done easier with this button here rather than messing with the mode dial. The rest basically do nothing except for the macro mode, which we already talked about. As for white balance, there are a handful of different presets. Auto is typically the best option, but it does tend to cool. The other modes sometimes help in certain situations, but none are particularly accurate. Overall, the camera has high contrast and punchy colors, which some might find appealing in some shots, but there are times when none of the modes quite look right. And all modes do have a slight magenta color shift, which is extremely common for these cameras. As for resolution, you can choose from 12 all the way up to 48 megapixels, which is nonsense. When you up the photo resolution setting, the pixel number on the file goes up, but the end result doesn't seem to change at all, and it does not have 12 megapixels worth of detail. Fine detail is mushy and smeared with bad digital artifacts. It almost looks like a watercolor filter has been applied, and detail plummets further in low light. Still, they aren't the worst pictures I've seen. There are even cheaper cameras out there that take arguably worse pictures. But it's disappointing that there are so few alternatives in this price range currently available, because there used to be more. To illustrate that point, let's take a look at some comparison pictures. This is an 18-year-old 4 megapixel Canon point and shoot. This first picture is from the Minolta, and this one is from the 4 megapixel Canon. The color on the Canon is far more accurate, properly showing off the green late spring color. The Minolta makes it look like fall, or like the entire area suffered from a mudstorm and everything got a little dirty. If you crop in a bit, you can see that the 4 megapixel Canon has similar and more natural looking detail. Looking at the foliage, the Minolta smears and swirls it into a muddy mess. The Canon is low resolution, but the per pixel sharpness is much better. If we look into the shady areas, the Minolta has brighter shadows, but the shadows are almost completely lacking color and have strong artifacts. The shadows are darker on the Canon, but they have good color. Looking at another pic, you can see that the 18-year-old Canon once again has better color, and it maintains the highlights much better. And if I crop in, once again the detail is similar and less artificial looking on the Canon. But the Canon has 4x optical zoom. Here are two more pictures. The Canon was at 4x zoom, and the Minolta I used the digital zoom to roughly match the field of view. The difference is not small. The optical zoom on the Canon results in an image that absolutely smashes the one from the Minolta. The digital zoom on the Minolta is completely pointless, as the results are exactly the same if I zoom in first or if I simply crop a picture after the fact. As weak as the image quality is, the ergonomics and usability of the Minolta are just as frustrating, maybe more so. When walking through the park with several cameras, it was always annoying switching back to the Minolta. Not only does the camera default to photo mode on being powered up, other settings return to default at odd times as well. At one point, I set the exposure compensation at -1. I took a picture, switched to playback mode to make sure it showed up, and then I went back to photo mode only to find that the exposure compensation had reverted back to 0. Not a big deal, but a little bit annoying, especially if you don't notice it when you start taking more pictures. And switching to playback mode after each pic became a habit because the inconsistent shutter button created situations where I thought it had taken a picture, but it hadn't. Sometimes a mode change would glitch and not fully change, so it was still in the new mode, but continued to behave as if it was in the previous mode. Overall, it's just a frustrating camera to use. Switching to any other camera, including the 18-year-old Canon, was a big improvement in the user experience. Video isn't the main focus of this review, but I'll talk about it a bit. This Minolta says it can record at up to 4K 60, but the 4K 60 videos do not function. I tried both the high compression and the H.264 modes, and when opened in a video player, both options result in a single static frame while the audio plays in the background. DaVinci Resolve couldn't use the files at all. The 30 frames per second modes work fine though, and the 1080p 128 frames per second mode works, though it's actually 125 frames per second. Rolling shutter is noticeable, and there's no image stabilization of any kind. This is a camera that would really be best on a tripod. The highlight retention seems slightly better in videos, but unfortunately this is due to the automatic dynamic range boost feature it has. This feature cannot be turned off, and it pops in and out and adjusts up and down constantly. It's very distracting, and in low light it's even worse, often applying to virtually the entire frame, introducing noise, reducing detail, and turning the colors an odd pastel. In terms of detail, don't expect good 4K detail from any camera in this price range, no matter whose name is on it. But for the price, the camera has decent detail, as long as your subject is beyond 3 feet or so due to the fixed focus. And the lighting is good. And the camera's on a tripod. Audio is a strange mixed bag. As usual for these types of cameras, the audio is mono only, even when using the audio input jack, which this camera has. The built-in mic sounds a bit muffled, and it picks up camera handling noise louder than anything else, but it's still better than some others I've tried. Here's an example of the audio from the built-in microphone on the Minolta. Right now I'm holding the camera so that you can get an idea of the handling noise. I'm just barely moving my hands around the camera very carefully, just to kind of adjust my grip a little bit, and now I'm not even adjusting my grip. I'm literally just holding the camera in one hand. I'm not moving my hand. So if you still hear any noise, that's how much it picks up, the slight creaks and shifts of the camera itself. I'm currently probably a little bit too close to be within the focusing distance. I'm probably a little bit within the minimum focus distance. This is the fluorescent auto white balance setting, which is, I tried the different modes, and this is the best one in here. It's not perfect, but it's much better than the others. So this is the best I can get the color and white balance in here. And this is how the internal microphone sounds, and this is how it looks about 1.5 feet or so away from the desk. When using an external microphone, there's no indication that a mic is plugged in or working. There's no icons or anything. There's also no way to see the audio levels or even to adjust them, so you'll have no idea if the audio is too low, if it's clipping, if the external mic is even detected, or if you're even recording any audio at all. There's also no plug-in power supplied by the jack, so you cannot use passive microphones. You can only use powered microphones. However, when using a high-quality, powered, external microphone, the single mono track you actually get is kind of okay. It's not amazing, but it's far better than I normally get from these types of cameras. It's just a shame that the implementation is so limited. Alright, now I'm recording with the Sennheiser MKE600 shotgun microphone powered by a AA battery, and it is plugged into the Minolta camera. I also switched to auto white balance just for the heck of it so you can see the difference. Hopefully it's working now. It was working in my testing, but I did have to try 2 different cables because the 3.5mm jack is slightly recessed on the Minolta, and the first cable I used apparently didn't seat fully, and so it didn't record any audio. I didn't know that until it just didn't have any audio when it came back, but this one seems to work in my testing, so hopefully it's working now. And actually, I just noticed something that I've never noticed before on this camera. The screen just turned off. I'm recording audio, and the screen turned off. I had to press the button to make the screen turn back on, so hopefully it's actually recording. Anyway, this is how the audio sounds from a microphone that costs nearly 3 times as much as the camera. Overall, the video isn't the worst out there, but a 10-year-old cell phone does take better video. So does a 14-year-old Kodak ZI-8 I got from eBay for $20. And in terms of photos, an 18-year-old 4-megapixel Canon point-and-shoot crushes the Minolta. It has autofocus, a proper strobe flash, 4x optical zoom, fully manual exposure controls, much better color, a better interface with far more options, better ergonomics, and it captures a similar amount of detail. Compared to entry-level name-brand cameras from well over a decade ago, this Minolta's embarrassing. It's just a shame that those types of cameras aren't available new right now. So hopefully I've made it clear that image quality, while certainly not great, isn't even the biggest issue this Minolta or the flood of similar cheap cameras and camcorders on the market these days suffer from. They don't feel like they were designed by someone who knows or even cares about how to make good cameras. Instead, they seem designed merely to mimic a camera reasonably well, so they will be eye-catching in online ads. It irks me that so much of the design and marketing seems intended to merely give the appearance of legitimacy, right down to the little white box that turns green when you partially press the shutter button for absolutely no reason on this camera, except that it's what they think a camera's supposed to do, not to mention the fake lens. So that's why I recommend saving up and getting something better, if that's possible for you. For just a few $100s, you can get a camera that will be so much nicer to use than these generic cameras in every way. And there are deals to be had out there on the used market if you're willing to look around a bit. If it's not possible or practical for you to save up and spend more, and you want something new, you could probably buy a low-end unlocked cell phone for $100 to $200 that would be more capable than this camera. But if you really want a camera like this, it can technically take pictures and videos. And if you do buy one and are happy with it, that's great. That's really all I hope for when I make these videos. I hope that people are happy with their purchases and don't end up surprised or disappointed by what they get after spending their money. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Take care.